Mr. Hardie, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and members of this committee for your service, for this hearing, and for the opportunity to speak with you today. This is just a brief overview. There are more details on my written submission. I really hope that you'll take the time to read the few pages of it. I'm Anthony Hardie, a 1991 Gulf War and Somalia veteran. I'm Director of Veterans for Common Sense, and while I've provided testimony on several occasions, today is especially notable. Exactly 25 years ago tonight, we launched the ground war of Operation Desert Storm and successfully liberated Kuwait. Tonight, I would like for us to remember and honor the nearly 300 warriors who made the ultimate sacrifice. I would also like us to remember and honor our Gulf War veterans, including those in this room and watching, and our leaders who led us to decisive military victory. Our war was relatively short, but you've heard our stories before, and with 1/4 to 1/3 of us coming home with serious and debilitating health issues now known as Gulf War illness, we faced a new battle, a long war to obtain health care, effective health care and VA assistance from entrenched government officials who seemed intent on minimization and denial at every turn. Even through to today, VA describes our toxic wounds as medically unexplained. Finally, in 1998, we won enactment of 2 landmark bills for Gulf War veterans to guarantee health care and benefits based on research. Yet from the beginning, VA officials circumvented their implementation. That leads us to today. The Institute of Medicine recently released its final report on the Gulf War and Health Series under VA contract as directed by the 1998 legislation. It's highly problematic. As I walked through the airport on my way home from the report's release, the weight of the bag with nearly 2 decades of these IOM reports was heavy on my shoulder, and I want to show that weight. My heart was even heavier because their collective weight has added little to nothing for Gulf War veterans. It has not associated any of our exposures with their health issues and has added little towards the development of effective evidence-based treatments for Gulf War illness. The real weight is being borne by Gulf War veterans who are suffering from Gulf War illness. This new report recommends no further research using animal models of Gulf War toxic exposures, which amounts to rolling up the sidewalk on this promising avenue of Gulf War illness research, just when it's beginning to unravel the underlying mechanisms of Gulf War illness and point to treatment targets. And this now affects not just non-VA CDMRP research, but VA research as well. In one section, it points out that the VA hasn't reported critical data, but in another, recommends ending research on a long list of health conditions, despite long histories of them in Gulf War veterans, not reported by VA. While acknowledging Gulf War illness is the 1991 Gulf War signature condition, there were no Gulf War illness researchers on this panel. It recommends a shift to brain-body interconnectedness that departs from the scientific opinion that effective treatments, cures, and it is hoped preventions can likely be found. Instead, this is more like the 1990s when VA and DoD officials, some of whom were involved in writing this report, denied Gulf War veterans toxic exposures, denied benefits, and failed to develop treatments or preventions. And now VA and DoD have developed a clinical practice guideline that goes back to the very darkest days of the 1990s, authored by some of these same old names and ideas. Despite VA public statements to the contrary, including to this committee, this guide for VA and DoD doctors is filled with references to psychosomatic and somatoform disorders, 52 times to be exact. Its primary recommendations for Gulf War illness are cognitive behavioral therapy, or talk therapy, exercise, and psychotropic drugs. Suicidal ideation is listed in the guide as a notable adverse effect for every single one of those medications at a time when we have a suicide crisis amongst veterans. VA has active Gulf War veteran studies on CBT and exercise, but somehow still recommends them as evidence-based in this definitive guide. 25 years after our war, VA has circumvented most of the aims of the 1998 laws intended to help us. In addition to the above, VA lost its registry for Gulf War spouses and children, ignored and then gutted the Gulf War Research Advisory Committee, misleads Congress in its reports to Congress, found no link between Gulf War exposures in Congress, including in these manuals, identified almost no new presumptives. If we measure VA's success by how it's improved Gulf War veterans' health 25 years after the war, VA still has not a single evidence-based treatment for Gulf War illness. Others among us have died of ALS, brain cancer, and suicide, and only since the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program was enacted, and through the support of many on this committee, has VA even begun to look at developing treatments. And while there is real research progress, most of it is being made outside of and in spite of VA in the CDMRP, thanks to many of your support. 25 years later, 1/4 to 1/3 of us Gulf War veterans continue to struggle with the health and life effects of Gulf War illness. We must not continue to allow VA and DoD to substitute risk communication for evidence-based health care. psychosomatic drugs for treatment-focused research, SPIN for substance, or don't look, don't find for the objective collection, analysis, and reporting of deployment health outcomes. The letter, the spirit, and the intent of the 1998 Persian Gulf War laws that we fought so hard to win have yet to be achieved. And again, this is just a brief overview. On this 25th anniversary of the Gulf War, our Gulf War veterans deserve the very best that modern science and the U.S. government can offer to improve their health and lives. Mr. Chairman, as one of our Gulf War veterans and members of this powerful committee, please join together and with your colleagues on both sides of the aisle and in both houses and help fix these serious issues once and for all. My fellow Gulf War veteran David Winnett and I look forward to your questions. Thank you again for this opportunity.